Hi, and thanks for joining me. Don't forget, you need to listen to the reading first, which comes from the first part of Luke chapter 16. There'll also be a supplement to this message, which you can go to afterwards if you choose to. But see how you get on with this first. So I'll start with Robin Hood. Robin Hood, a legendary English folklore character that Hollywood loves, keeps making more and more films about him, and people generally have a good feeling about Robin Hood, which is kind of odd because generally we disapprove of robbery by violence, which is basically what Robin Hood does. But there's a couple of other themes in it, though, which mean that we're willing to make an exception in his case. The themes, I think, are this. He lives in a system that is so corrupt it is actually more possible to do good by breaking the law than by keeping it. And secondly, he takes from those who can well afford it to give to those who are being made desperate by those who can well afford it. He steals from the rich to give to the poor. He steals from the oppressor to give to the oppressed. And we like that. That's the stuff of heroes. It's sort of what the main character in this parable does, but the motives are not quite so noble. Let's come back to that, though, later. I'm not going to push the Robin Hood thing, but come back to that. A theme that is strong in this parable, which is very relevant to the immediate situation for many people, is redundancy from work. In the main character of the parable's case, it's got nothing to do with the economic fallout of COVID-19 and a bleak job market in front full of other people looking for work. It's to do with something else, something that he appears to have brought upon himself, either by inefficiency or by deceptions or something. We're not told the detail, therefore it's not going to affect the main point of the story. And it's a good moment to just remind ourselves that Jesus did not usually tell parables as simple everyday illustrations to make a point clearer, but mostly to tease us with a game whereby we're left trying to work out how the parable relates to the truth that Jesus is teaching. We explore it. It teases the mind. Each parable has its own set of rules which are not told in advance. You just have to play the game, and you learn by playing the game. It's very, very powerful. And another element of telling parables is that we remember stories and vivid illustrations better than we remember ideas simply described as the idea. So here Jesus has a particular idea coming to it. He wants people to learn it, but he attaches it to this rather strange story. Now, I need to say up front that of all the parables that Jesus told, this is the one that is most disputed when it comes to its meaning. So frankly, I'm going to share my perspective on it, but there are very many other takes on this parable as well you might want to explore. Let's notice the opening words. I think with parables of Jesus, notice the opening words and notice what Jesus says in conclusion. The opening words, there was a rich man. He's about to use exactly the same opening words for the next parable he tells. So I think there's a theme in play. He's about to say in between the two parables that you cannot serve both God and greed. And so I think there is a definite theme in play by starting, there was a rich man. Then let's go from the beginning to the very end, to what he sums it up and says so. He says, I tell you that you need to make friends with money whilst you have money, because it's going to run out. And then you'll want the right people to be ready to welcome you into eternal dwellings. In the parable, the guy is to be welcomed into ordinary everyday homes, but Jesus is sort of pitching it and saying, no, but it's your eternal dwelling that I'm really talking about here. I think it'll help us just to remember who it is who we expect to find in eternal dwellings. The saying of Jesus, which you'll remember, I'm sure, blessed are you poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. So if I want shares in the kingdom of God, then it's the poor that need to see me as being on their side. Something along those kinds of line matches very well with what Jesus said in his closing parables in Matthew, that whatever you do for the poor or the broken, the whoever is most in need, I consider that as how you've treated me. Okay, bear that all in mind as we go. Bear in mind too the context in which Jesus told this parable. Jesus lived in an occupied country, part of the Roman Empire, and the Roman heel stood very hard upon Israel. There was a tax system which was designed to profit the empire, not Israel. So Israel was required to give a certain amount into the coffers of the empire, so much grain, so much wine, so much olive oil, so much other produce, etc., to be used for the profiting of the empire, to feed the occupying army, all kinds of things. So there was this requirement of a certain amount that had to be produced at each year. Israel was then divided into tax regions, and the regional tax officer would assess the region, and it would have a certain amount. That region had to produce a certain amount. Didn't matter what the harvest was like. The first X amount had to go to the empire, or rather more to the tax person. So the regions were divided into areas, and the local taxman was the person who you most dreaded, because the local taxman would tell you that your little peasant farm had to produce this year the following quantities, and he would be collecting on it. It wasn't income tax, it wasn't a percentage, it was, this is the quantity I'm going to come and collect from you. If you could not produce that, he had lots of violent options, including enslaving members of your household permanently or temporarily, but often permanently, selling them. He could use a whole range of violent methods. And so if the year came when you actually couldn't pay, and that happened to lots of people, then you had to borrow. Who did you borrow from? The rich. You had to borrow from the rich, and that's where the rich could come in as loan sharks. So the rich man in this parable is either functioning like a loan shark or is one of the tax people themselves, because the tax people grew very fat on this method. The central character of the parable works for a loan shark type or a tax collecting type rich man. And his job is to go around to those who have become indebted by this system to his boss, and to set the amount they've got to pay in their debt. This is not the tax, this is the debt they've got to pay as well. And to go and collect it by force if need be. So he's probably not a very nice guy. Something goes wrong in his employment, and he is given notice, and he's required to prepare the books, as it were, to hand over to his successor. And so therefore he's now in a desperate situation. He's looking ahead at the job market, and he says, I'm not going to compete in that. I don't know what to do. It looks like I have no future. So he decides to play his boss at the boss's own game, at corruption, and use his remaining few days to create gratitude in those who are indebted to his boss. So he switches loyalties. Up to now, he represents his boss. Now he's decided to represent the interests of those who are the debtors indebted to his boss. And he calls them in, and he reduces the amount they loan. He just simple dishonest cheat, really. And the result is he's planning that when he loses the money, there'll be homes where there's a welcome for him. And Jesus uses that image to say, so you want to be welcomed into the homes that are eternal. So while you have the money and the time is running on it, use it for the poor and those in debt and those in desperation. Don't use it to prop up the wealthy in their wealth. Have you noticed? I bet you haven't, but as soon as I say it, if you're a Bible reader, you go, yeah, of course, that's true. There's no money in the creation narratives of Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. There's no money. God didn't create it. There's no money in the creation narratives because money doesn't occur in nature. It's not actually a thing at all. Money happens here. It's an idea that people have had and which we buy into. And it only exists as we imagine it to exist. So if the entire human race tomorrow morning woke up not believing in money anymore, there wouldn't be any money. There would be banknotes lying around and stuff like that, but there wouldn't be any money. Those things would have no further value. Money only exists while we agree it exists. It's a figment of our imagination and actually has no reality. Now, this guy, as I say, is finding out that the money is actually not going to be there. It's the same thing we all have to find out. You can't take it with you. It's just a temporary idea. It won't last. So what about when it's run out? So he's going to have to either be dishonest with his boss, which is what he chooses, or continue to be unjust to the boss's debtors. And the boss ends up having to go, do you know what, guy, you paid the game well. His boss, who's been cheated, actually admits, we play a corruption thing here. You did better than me. Well done. You've got to admit it. He played the game well and came out on top in the end. He hasn't got his job anymore, but he has got his future a bit worked out. So Jesus says, use the money. It's going to run out. It's not there forever. While you have it in your hands, while the money thing is in play, make sure you use it smart and not stupid. Don't believe the myth. You can't serve God and greed. Don't buy into believing that money is more than it actually is. See, Jesus in his teaching has a constant effort to get us to see things in a new way. Jesus saw things differently, and he wants us to see things in a new way too. In this case, money. To stop believing the myths that we've grown up with and start believing something that's true. Money has no real value. It's going anyway. Going to lose it. What has value, what has eternity in it, is compassion and justice and mercy and goodness. Those kinds of things have eternity in it. Nobody's going to commend you for being rich in eternity. It will be meaningless. And so make sure you're serving what has meaning or what connects you to eternity. In other words, guys, Jesus taught his followers to be cynics. I know that we tend to go, well, no. In this world, we, the Christians and other religious people, believe stuff, and everybody else is cynical and doesn't believe stuff. But actually, if you look at the ministry of Jesus, he spent very little time telling people what he wanted them to accept by belief and by faith, and much more focus on challenging the myths that people believed, the misinformation they accepted. And I think that as Christians, we need to do much more of that, because our world is running on fantasies, and they're quite harmful. And what we need to do is go, guys, the emperor's got no clothes. Guys, I'm a cynic. I've listened to Jesus, and I no longer believe the stuff you guys believe. I will no longer organise my life as if I believed those things. There are some practicalities I'll have to see to, but I will not give my life to the myths that people grow up believing and die believing. I'm going to believe something more substantive, something more substantial, something that God agrees with. And so basically to follow Jesus is to become a cynic and stop believing the nonsense. It's not that we're the people who are believers. Everybody's believers. It's just that people are believing in the most extraordinary myths imaginable and basing whole lives on it. Jesus is offering us a way out of that. And he says, try and see these things differently and use your money for better purposes than you might ever have thought it was there to do. God bless you, and I hope you'll join me another time.